September 12, 1944, Luxembourg. A captured German Gefreiter sat beside a muddy road, hands bound, watching American infantrymen march past toward the German border. For 3 days he'd been a prisoner. For 3 days he'd watched the Americans with growing confusion that bordered on disbelief. Everything he'd been taught about American soldiers was wrong. Everything. The propaganda had said Americans were soft, dependent on luxury, unable to endure hardship like the lean, hard German soldier who could march forever on minimal rations and sparse equipment. The prisoner had believed it. He'd seen photographs of fat American civilians, read about their pampered lifestyle, heard officers describe how easily German veterans would defeat these inexperienced, overindulged Americans. But he'd been in combat against them for 6 weeks before his capture, and what he'd experienced contradicted everything he'd been told. The Americans didn't fight like soft, inexperienced troops. They fought with overwhelming firepower, constant air support, and logistics that seemed unlimited. They attacked positions German forces couldn't hold because American artillery never stopped firing. They advanced when German units were immobilized waiting for supplies that never came. And now, watching them march, the prisoner was seeing something that made no sense. An American military police corporal stood nearby guarding the prisoners. The German asked in broken English, "How much does that soldier carry?" He pointed at an infantryman marching past, pack towering above his helmet, gear strapped to every available surface. The MP looked at the passing soldier and shrugged. 60, 70 pounds probably, full combat load, maybe more if he's carrying extra ammo for the bar. 60 to 70 pounds. The German prisoner looked down at his own equipment, confiscated when he'd been captured and piled beside him. His rifle, his cartridge belt, his canteen, his mess kit, his gas mask canister that he'd actually stopped carrying months ago because it was heavy and useless, his bread bag with a few personal items, his half of a shelter quarter. Everything he owned as a German infantryman totaled perhaps 28 to 30 pounds. The American carried more than twice that weight. Yet the American division he was watching had covered 32 miles yesterday, 32 miles in 1 day. The prisoner's own unit, the 352nd Infantry Division, had been marching in retreat for weeks. On a good day, when they weren't being strafed by American aircraft or diverted around destroyed bridges, they managed 12 to 15 miles, often less. And they were supposedly traveling light, while the Americans were burdened with excessive equipment. How was this possible? How could soldiers carrying twice the weight march twice the distance? The prisoner didn't know. He couldn't explain it, but he was watching it happen. And somewhere in his exhausted, demoralized mind, he understood that this paradox, this impossible reality of Americans carrying more and moving faster, was why Germany was losing the war. What that German prisoner witnessed, what thousands of German soldiers experienced throughout 1944 and 1945, was the physical manifestation of American industrial and logistical superiority. Not in tanks or planes or ships, but in the basic infantry load, the equipment an individual soldier carried, the weight on his back, the gear that kept him fed, dry, armed, and fighting. Americans carried twice as much as Germans. not because they were stronger or tougher, but because American logistics made it possible and necessary. And that abundance of personal equipment, multiplied across millions of soldiers, was as decisive as any weapon. This is the story of the infantry load in World War II. How American soldiers carried 60 to 70 pounds of gear and marched farther than German soldiers carrying 30 pounds. How abundance beat austerity at the most basic level. How the weight a soldier carried revealed which side had functioning logistics and which side was slowly starving for supplies. And how German prisoners of war couldn't believe American equipment quality until they saw it, touched it, and in many cases stole it for themselves because their own gear had fallen apart. Let me take you back to 1941 and show you how two completely different philosophies of infantry equipment led to radically different outcomes. When the United States entered World War II in December 1941, the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps faced an enormous challenge. They needed to equip, clothe, and supply an army that would grow from 1.6 million men to over 8 million in less than 4 years. Everything had to be designed, tested, manufactured, and distributed on a scale never before attempted. Uniforms, boots, helmets, webbing, packs, shelter, everything. The Quartermaster Corps approached this challenge with American industrial logic. Standardize everything. Design for mass production. Optimize for durability and functionality, not cost. Create systems where damaged equipment could be replaced immediately rather than repaired. And most importantly, ensure that every soldier received complete equipment sets with spares available. The result was documented in exhaustive detail in Technical Manual 21305, the manual for the Quartermaster Corps, published in 1943. This manual specified exactly what every American soldier would carry down to the ounce. It listed every item of clothing, every piece of equipment, every tool and weapon. And it guaranteed that these items would be available, would be replaced when worn out, and would be manufactured to consistent quality standards. The basic American infantry load, as specified in TM 21305 and refined through combat experience, consisted of specific items with specific weights. M1 Garand rifle, 9.5 pounds. Cartridge belt with 80 rounds of ammunition, 6 pounds. Steel helmet M1 with liner, 2.85 pounds. Entrenching tool with carrier, 2.75 pounds. Canteen filled with water, 2.25 pounds. Gas mask in carrier, 3 pounds. First aid pouch with contents, 1/2 pound. Raincoat, 3 pounds. Shelter half with poles and stakes, 3 pounds. Wool blanket, 4 pounds. 3 days of K-rations, 6 pounds. Personal items including mess kit, toiletries, and spare socks, approximately 3 pounds. Adding these up, the basic load totaled 46 pounds. This was what every American infantryman carried on administrative marches in rear areas. But in combat, additional equipment was added. An ammunition bandolier with 48 additional rounds, 3 pounds. 2 hand grenades, 2 pounds. Bayonet with scabbard, 1 pound. Additional equipment varying by role, machine gun ammunition, mortar rounds, radio batteries, medical supplies, demolition charges. The combat load for a standard rifleman reached 60 to 70 pounds. For specialists like machine gunners or mortar crews, it could exceed 80 pounds. 70 pounds is significant weight. For reference, that's equivalent to carrying a large suitcase packed completely full, or a 10-year-old child on your back for hours while walking 20 to 30 miles in heat or cold, through mud or snow, under enemy fire. It sounds impossible. It sounds like it would slow soldiers down, exhaust them, make them combat ineffective. German military theory said exactly that. Heavy loads reduced mobility, increased fatigue, and degraded combat effectiveness. Therefore, German doctrine emphasized light infantry loads, minimal equipment, maximum mobility. But American doctrine emphasized something different: sustainability. An American soldier carrying 70 pounds of equipment could fight for 3 days without resupply. He had food, water, ammunition, shelter, first aid, and tools. He could dig a fighting position, sleep under cover, treat wounds, and continue fighting. A German soldier carrying 30 pounds might be more mobile initially, but he'd run out of food in a day, ammunition in one firefight, and had no shelter if it rained. He needed constant resupply to remain effective. And in 1944, German logistics couldn't provide that resupply. The German approach to infantry equipment was completely different. The German army had inherited equipment designs from World War I and the interwar period. These designs emphasized durability and traditional military appearance over functionality. The iconic German jackboot, the Marschstiefel, was a perfect example. A single piece of leather extending to just below the knee, hobnailed sole, designed to look impressive on parade and provide ankle support. It was heavy, expensive to manufacture, took weeks to break in, and was actually terrible for long marches. The hobnails provided grip on cobblestones but were slippery on ice, muddy roads, or wet grass. The stiff leather caused blisters. The weight, over 4 pounds per pair, contributed to foot fatigue. But the jackboot looked military. It looked German, so it remained standard issue despite its practical limitations. At least it remained standard until leather shortages in 1943 forced Germany to switch to cheaper alternatives. By 1944, German soldiers were often issued lace-up boots made from inferior leather or even ersatz materials, synthetic substitutes. These fell apart quickly. German soldiers increasingly wore captured Soviet, British, or American boots because they were simply better. The official German infantry load, as specified in the Kriegstierkennzeichnung, the German equipment tables, was actually quite comprehensive on paper. The K-rations tables listed everything a German infantryman was supposed to carry. Kar 98K rifle, 8.6 pounds. Y-straps and belt system for carrying equipment, 2.6 pounds. Ammunition pouches containing 60 rounds, 6.2 pounds. Steel helmet, 3.1 pounds. Entrenching tool, 2.2 pounds. Canteen, 2.2 pounds when full. Gas mask in canister, 3.7 pounds. Bread bag for rations and personal items, 1.8 pounds when loaded. Mess kit, 1.1 pounds. Zeltbahn, the shelter quarter that 4 soldiers combined to make a tent, 3.3 pounds. Blanket, 4 pounds. The total official German load was approximately 61 to 70 pounds, essentially identical to the American load. On paper, German and American soldiers carried similar weights, but there was a critical difference between official tables and battlefield reality. The German equipment tables specified what soldiers should carry, but by 1943, and increasingly in 1944 and 1945, German soldiers weren't carrying the official load. They were carrying whatever they actually had, which was often far less. Blankets weren't issued because factories couldn't produce enough. Shelter quarters were lost and not replaced. Gas masks were discarded in the field because soldiers decided they were useless weight and nobody was going to use gas anyway. Spare clothing was never issued because it didn't exist. The bread bag often contained the soldier's total possessions. A few scraps of food, perhaps a letter from home, maybe a photograph. That was it. By 1944, the average German infantryman on the Eastern or Western Front was carrying approximately 13 to 15 kilograms, 28 to 33 pounds, less than half the official load. Not because German doctrine said to travel light, but because the equipment simply wasn't available. Germany couldn't manufacture enough blankets, couldn't produce enough shelter quarters, couldn't supply enough spare clothing. So soldiers made do with what they had. And what they had was increasingly inadequate. This created a vicious cycle. Soldiers with inadequate equipment suffered more from weather. Cold soldiers got frostbite, sick soldiers couldn't march, exhausted soldiers couldn't fight effectively. But Germany couldn't remedy the equipment shortage because industrial capacity was dedicated to weapons production and being destroyed by Allied bombing. So the shortage worsened, soldier effectiveness declined, and the cycle continued. Meanwhile, American soldiers were carrying full loads because everything was available. When a soldier wore out his boots, he received new boots. When his raincoat tore, he got a replacement. When he lost his shelter half, another was issued. The American supply system ensured that soldiers maintained full equipment sets because the industrial capacity existed to replace anything and the logistics system existed to deliver it. But carrying the weight was only part of the challenge. Soldiers had to march with these loads, and here's where the paradox becomes most apparent. American soldiers carrying 60 to 70 pounds marched farther and faster than German soldiers carrying 30 pounds. This seems impossible. It contradicts basic physics. Heavier loads should slow you down, except they didn't. And the reason why reveals the fundamental difference between American and German military logistics. The U.S. Army Infantry School at Fort Benning, Georgia, established standard march rates based on extensive testing with soldiers carrying full combat loads. The standard tactical march rate was 4 miles per hour sustained for 8 hours, covering 32 miles in a day. This was with 60 to 70-pound loads. Soldiers were expected to maintain this pace on roads or trails in temperate weather with appropriate rest breaks every hour. Forced marches could achieve 5 miles per hour for 6 hours, covering 30 miles. Though this was considered exhausting and not sustainable for multiple days, these weren't theoretical numbers. These were achieved routinely by American infantry divisions in Europe. The 4th Infantry Division's march from Utah Beach inland after D-Day covered over 30 miles in the first 36 hours. The 2nd Infantry Division advanced 35 miles in 2 days during the breakout from Normandy. The 90th Infantry Division covered 42 miles in 3 days during the pursuit across France. These distances were documented in division after-action reports, verified by map coordinates and timestamps. American infantry could march 30 to 35 miles per day repeatedly while carrying full combat loads. German march rates in 1944 and 1945 were dramatically lower. Unit war diaries from German divisions in France, Italy, and the Eastern Front document march distances that rarely exceeded 20 to 25 kilometers per day, 12 to 15 miles. Often it was less. The 352nd Infantry Division, defending Normandy, was ordered to march from Saint-Lô to the invasion beaches, a distance of approximately 40 kilometers, 25 miles. The march took 3 days. The division covered 8 to 13 kilometers per day, 5 to 8 miles. This with soldiers supposedly traveling light, carrying minimal equipment. Why were the Germans, with lighter loads, marching slower? Multiple factors combined to create this outcome. First, nutrition. American soldiers were fed approximately 4,000 calories daily. K-rations provided 3,000 calories for field operations, supplemented by hot meals when possible. German soldiers in 1944 were receiving rations that provided approximately 1,500 to 2,000 calories daily, often less. Hungry soldiers march slower than well-fed soldiers. The weight of the load matters less than the energy available to carry it. Second, footwear. The American GI boot was a revolutionary design, two-piece construction with a leather upper and a separate rubber sole that could be replaced. The boot was designed for 500 miles of hard use before needing resoling. Soldiers typically received 2 pairs, allowing them to rotate and dry boots between wears. The U.S. produced 190 million pairs of these boots during the war, ensuring that every soldier had adequate footwear and replacements were always available. The German jackboot, by contrast, was designed for appearance, not endurance. The hobnailed sole was good for perhaps 200 miles before the nails wore down and needed replacement. The stiff leather caused blisters that could incapacitate soldiers, and by 1944, boot quality had degraded as leather shortages forced the use of inferior materials. German soldiers frequently developed foot problems that American soldiers avoided. Trench foot, frostbite, blisters, and infections were epidemic in German units. These conditions made marching painful or impossible. Third, and most significantly, American infantry didn't march continuously. They were rotated. A division would march for 4 to 6 hours, then trucks would arrive and transport soldiers for the next leg, or soldiers would march while their heavy equipment was trucked ahead. This rotation meant that soldiers never marched for 8 straight hours carrying full loads. They marched for 4 hours, rode for 4 hours, marched again. The official march rate of 32 miles per day was achievable because soldiers weren't marching the entire 32 miles on foot. German infantry in 1944 had no such luxury. truck transport was limited or non-existent. Horses were used for heavy equipment, but infantry marched continuously. When the 352nd Infantry Division was ordered to march 40 kilometers to counter the D-Day invasion, they marched the entire distance on foot because no trucks were available. They marched with minimal rest because the tactical situation was urgent. They arrived exhausted, having covered the distance in 3 days instead of the 1 day it should have taken. And then they were expected to fight immediately against fresh American troops who'd been rotated and rested. The march rate disparity wasn't about German soldiers being weaker or less capable. It was about logistics. Well-fed soldiers march faster than hungry soldiers. Soldiers with good boots march farther than soldiers with worn-out boots. Soldiers who are rotated between marching and truck transport cover more distance than soldiers who march continuously. And soldiers who receive regular rest, hot meals, and medical care maintain better march discipline than soldiers who receive none of those things. Let me tell you about a specific comparison that illustrates this perfectly. August 1944, Northern France. The 30th Infantry Division, U.S. Army, was pursuing retreating German forces toward the Seine River. Over a 5-day period from August 15th to August 20th, the division advanced 112 miles. That's an average of 22 miles per day for 5 consecutive days. The division's after-action report notes that soldiers marched approximately half this distance on foot, with truck transport covering the remainder. Total distance moved, 112 miles. Total distance marched on foot by individual soldiers, approximately 50 to 60 miles over 5 days, or 10 to 12 miles per day of actual walking. During the same period, the German 275th Infantry Division was retreating ahead of American forces. The division war diary documents their movement. August 15th marched 18 kilometers from Domfront toward Argenton. August 16th marched 12 kilometers continuing retreat. August 17th, scattered by American air attacks, units separated minimal movement. August 18th, reformed units marched 8 kilometers. August 19th, marched 15 kilometers. August 20th, reached Seine River after marching 20 kilometers. Total distance covered in 5 days, 73 kilometers, 45 miles. Average 9 miles per day. And the Germans were traveling lighter, theoretically more mobile, supposedly faster. The Americans covered 112 miles, while the Germans covered 45 miles in the same time period. The Americans were advancing, maintaining unit cohesion, remaining combat effective. The Germans were retreating, losing equipment and stragglers, arriving at the Seine River with perhaps 60% of their starting strength. The difference wasn't courage or tactical skill. It was logistics. The Americans had the trucks, the fuel, the food, and the equipment to maintain operational tempo. The Germans had their feet, and whatever they carried. Now let's talk about what those American soldiers were actually carrying, because the 70-pound load wasn't just weight, it was capability. Every item had a purpose. Every piece of equipment solved a problem, and the quality of American equipment was so superior to German equivalents that German soldiers would steal it whenever possible. The M1 Garand rifle, 9.5 pounds, we've discussed before. It was semi-automatic, held 8 rounds, and could fire as fast as a soldier could pull the trigger. The German Kar 98K was bolt-action, held 5 rounds, and required manual cycling between shots. The Garand weighed 1 pound more than the Kar 98K, but provided 3 times the firepower. That extra pound was worth it. The steel helmet M1, the iconic American helmet, weighed 2.85 pounds including the liner. It was stamped from a single piece of manganese steel and featured a suspension system that absorbed impact. The German Stahlhelm weighed approximately 3.1 pounds and provided excellent protection, arguably better than the M1 in some respects. But the M1 had one critical advantage. The liner could be worn separately as a sun helmet in hot weather, and the steel shell could be used as a wash basin, cooking pot, or entrenching tool. Versatility added value beyond just protection. The entrenching tool, 2.75 pounds, seems like a small thing, but the ability to dig a fighting position quickly could mean the difference between life and death under artillery fire. American soldiers were trained to dig in immediately upon stopping. The M1943 entrenching tool was designed for efficiency. Folding handle, sharp edge, could dig through most soil types. German soldiers carried similar tools, but by 1944, quality had declined and many soldiers simply didn't have them because they'd been lost and not replaced. The shelter half, 3 pounds, was half of a 2-man tent. 2 soldiers combined their shelter halves to create a weatherproof shelter. This seems obvious now, but it was revolutionary efficiency. Each soldier carried half the weight, but 2 soldiers together had complete shelter. The German Zeltbahn served the same purpose, requiring 4 soldiers to combine their quarters for a complete tent. The American system was simpler and more flexible. The raincoat, 3 pounds, was rubberized canvas that kept soldiers dry. Staying dry was critical for maintaining health and morale. Wet soldiers got sick, especially in cold weather. The U.S. Army Medical Department documented that soldiers with adequate rain protection had significantly lower rates of respiratory illness and trench foot. The investment of 3 pounds of weight prevented medical evacuations and maintained combat effectiveness. German soldiers often lacked adequate rain gear. Their wool uniforms absorbed water and took days to dry. Wet German soldiers got sick at higher rates and were less combat effective. K-rations, 6 pounds for 3 days' worth, provided 3,000 calories of nutrition in compact, durable packaging. We've discussed these before. But in the context of the infantry load, K-rations meant that American soldiers could operate for 72 hours without resupply. They could be cut off, surrounded, or advancing faster than supply lines could follow, and they'd still eat. German soldiers by 1944 were lucky to have 1 day's rations. Most were living on whatever they could scavenge or forage. Hungry soldiers can't march effectively. The cartridge belt with 80 rounds of 30-06 ammunition weighed 6 pounds. 80 rounds sounds like a lot. It wasn't. In combat, a soldier could expend 80 rounds in minutes. American logistics ensured that ammunition resupply was constant. Soldiers could fire freely knowing more ammunition would arrive. German soldiers with 60 rounds in their pouches had to conserve because resupply was uncertain. The weight of carrying extra ammunition was justified by the confidence it provided. The gas mask, 3 pounds, was almost never used but was mandatory equipment. Chemical weapons weren't employed by either side in Europe, making the gas mask seemingly useless weight. American soldiers complained about carrying gas masks. Some ditched them when officers weren't looking, but the mask's presence reflected American logistics philosophy: be prepared for anything. Carry what might be needed even if it probably won't be. German soldiers also carried gas masks initially, but increasingly discarded them as the war progressed, because they needed the weight capacity for more food or ammunition. Here's what German prisoners of war said about American equipment when they were interrogated. The quotes are from SHAF, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, interrogation reports declassified in the 1970s. Obergefreiter Hans Mueller, captured September 1944 in France. The American soldier carries everything. When we captured American positions, we found equipment we hadn't seen in months: blankets, dry socks, canned food, cigarettes, toilet paper. Our men would fight over captured American supplies, not weapons, supplies. We took their food, their boots, their raincoats. Everything was better quality than what we had. If we'd had their equipment, we could have kept fighting, but we had nothing. Gefreiter Wilhelm Schmidt, captured December 1944 during the Battle of the Bulge. We were told Americans were soft, needed luxury to fight. Then we saw what they actually carried: 70 pounds of equipment, and they still moved faster than us. Their boots alone were worth more than everything I owned. I was wearing boots I'd taken from a dead Russian soldier because my German boots had fallen apart. The American prisoner we captured had 2 pairs of boots. 2 pairs, both in perfect condition. We took them for our own men. This is why they win. They have 2 of everything while we have none of anything. Feldwebel Otto Becker, captured April 1945 in Germany. In the final months, we weren't fighting the American army. We were scavenging from American dead. Every man we killed, we stripped of equipment: food, clothing, ammunition. We used American weapons because we had no ammunition for German weapons. We wore American uniforms under our own because they were warmer. The American soldier who carried 70 pounds was carrying our entire supply system. When we killed him, we got 70 pounds of supplies we desperately needed. If he was carrying too much, we never noticed. He seemed to move just fine. These testimonies reveal the brutal reality. German soldiers were stripping American dead for basic supplies that American logistics provided routinely. American soldiers complained about carrying heavy loads, but they had the loads to complain about. German soldiers would have gratefully carried twice the weight if it meant having adequate food, clothing, and shelter. But Germany couldn't provide those supplies, so the question was moot. The quality gap in equipment extended to every category. American wool blankets were thick, warm, and durable. Soldiers received 2 blankets when deploying to cold weather theaters. German soldiers often had no blankets, or blankets so thin and worn they provided minimal warmth. American soldiers slept under cover, in sleeping bags when available, on air mattresses or bedrolls. German soldiers slept in holes in the ground, wrapped in whatever they had, often just their coats. American uniforms were designed for functionality. The M1943 field jacket was wind-resistant, water-repellent, had multiple pockets for equipment, and could be layered over wool uniforms for varying temperatures. It was manufactured in enormous quantities, millions of jackets, ensuring every soldier had one. German uniforms in 1944 were increasingly made from ersatz materials, synthetic fibers that didn't insulate well, wore out quickly, and looked shabby. The iconic German field gray wool uniform was still manufactured, but often wasn't available. Soldiers wore whatever could be issued, creating units where no two soldiers were dressed identically. Let me give you one specific example that demonstrates the quality gap. Socks. American soldiers received multiple pairs of wool socks and were instructed to change them daily, allowing wet socks to dry. The U.S. Army Medical Department had determined that frequent sock changes dramatically reduced trench foot, so soldiers carried multiple pairs, adding perhaps 1 pound to their load. The weight was justified by the medical benefit. German soldiers often had 1 pair of socks, or no socks, wrapping their feet in rags instead. The incidence of frostbite and trench foot in German units was catastrophic. Tens of thousands of German soldiers were incapacitated by foot problems that American soldiers avoided through simple preventive measures like carrying extra socks. The cumulative effect of superior equipment was that American soldiers, despite carrying heavier loads, remained healthier and more combat effective than German soldiers. They had lower rates of illness, lower rates of non-combat injuries, and higher morale. When you're dry because you have a raincoat, warm because you have a blanket, well-fed because you have rations, and confident because you have adequate ammunition, you fight better. When you're wet, cold, hungry, and low on ammunition, you fight worse. Equipment quality directly translated to combat effectiveness, but all of this equipment would have been useless if soldiers couldn't actually carry it. 70 pounds is a heavy load. Sustained marching with that weight required physical conditioning, proper techniques, and intelligent load distribution. The U.S. Army trained soldiers extensively in load carrying. Basic training included ruck marches with progressively heavier loads. Soldiers learned how to pack equipment efficiently, how to adjust straps to distribute weight properly, how to march with minimal fatigue. By the time soldiers deployed to combat theaters, they'd conditioned their bodies to handle the weight. The American pack system was designed for efficiency. The M1928 haversack and later the M1944 pack used a frame system that transferred weight to the hips rather than shoulders. This allowed soldiers to carry heavier loads with less fatigue. The German backpack, by contrast, was a simple cloth bag that hung from shoulder straps, placing all the weight on shoulders and back. Over long distances, this caused more fatigue and discomfort. It's a small design difference, but multiplied across 20-mile marches, it mattered significantly. American soldiers also had the advantage of knowing their equipment would be replaced. If a strap broke, a new pack would be issued. If the load became too heavy, non-essential items could be dumped and replaced later. This psychological security allowed soldiers to carry full loads without anxiety about losing irreplaceable equipment. German soldiers hoarded what they had because replacement was unlikely. A soldier who lost his blanket might go months without a new one. This created reluctance to carry full loads and tendency to cache equipment rather than carry it, reducing immediate combat effectiveness. The march rate advantage that Americans achieved wasn't just about moving from point A to point B faster. It was about operational tempo. An army that can move faster can concentrate forces quicker, respond to enemy movements more rapidly, and maintain initiative. During the pursuit across France in August 1944, American divisions advanced so quickly that German forces couldn't establish defensive lines. By the time Germans organized a position, Americans had already bypassed it. The ability to march 30 miles per day while the enemy managed 15 miles meant that Americans always arrived first, always had positional advantage, always forced Germans to react rather than act. In the Ardennes, during the Battle of the Bulge, the reverse happened briefly. Germans achieved surprise and advanced rapidly, while American units were caught unprepared. But even then, American march rates during the response were superior. The 101st Airborne Division moved over 100 miles from Reims to Bastogne in trucks, then marched into defensive positions, all within 24 hours. German units trying to reach Bastogne were slowed by poor roads, fuel shortages, and the need to march on foot because trucks were unavailable. The Americans arrived first, established defenses, and held. German march rates, even during their own offensive when they had tactical advantage, were slower than American march rates during defensive responses. By early 1945, the disparity was total. American soldiers were still carrying full loads, still being resupplied regularly, still equipped with the best gear American industry could produce. German soldiers were increasingly threadbare, uniforms patched and repatched, boots worn through and repaired with whatever was available, equipment improvised from scavenged materials. The Wehrmacht that had conquered most of Europe in 1940 looked like a professional army. The Wehrmacht of 1945 looked like refugees in uniform. The comparison wasn't even close. American commanders understood that logistics won wars. Equipment mattered, supply mattered. The ability to keep soldiers fed, clothed, armed, and healthy mattered more than tactical brilliance. General Omar Bradley, commanding 1st Army and later 12th Army Group, wrote in his memoirs that American success came not from superior tactics, but from superior logistics. American soldiers fought well because they were well supplied. They marched far because they were well fed. They endured hardship because they had equipment that protected them from the worst of it. German commanders understood this too, but understanding didn't help. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, when asked after the war why Germany lost in the West, cited logistics before tactics. The Americans brought everything they needed and more. We brought what we could scavenge. They replaced losses immediately. We couldn't replace anything. Their soldier carried 70 pounds because they could afford to supply him with 70 pounds. Our soldier carried 30 pounds because we couldn't supply even that much. It's not complicated. They had more one. The story of the infantry load is often overlooked in military history because it's not dramatic. There are no great battles over backpacks. No heroic last stands over who carried the better blanket. But the mundane details of equipment, weight, and supply are what actually determine military effectiveness. An army marches on its stomach, as Napoleon said, but it also marches on its boots, sleeps under its shelter, fights with its ammunition, and endures through the quality of its clothing. American soldiers carried 60 to 70 pounds and marched 32 miles per day because American industry provided the equipment and American logistics delivered it. German soldiers carried 30 pounds and marched 15 miles per day because German industry couldn't manufacture adequate equipment and German logistics couldn't deliver it. The American load was heavy, but it was complete. The German load was light, but it was inadequate. Complete and heavy beat inadequate and light. Every time. So when you think about why America won World War II, don't just think about tanks and aircraft. Think about the American soldier carrying 70 pounds of gear who could still march 30 miles in a day. Think about the German soldier carrying 30 pounds who couldn't keep pace because he was hungry, his boots were worn out, and he had no blanket to stay warm at night. Think about the logistics systems that created those situations. One side supplied abundance, one side couldn't supply basic needs. That difference, multiplied across millions of soldiers, decided the war as surely as any battle. The German prisoner sitting beside that Luxembourg road in September 1944 watching Americans march past carrying impossible loads understood this. He couldn't articulate it fully. He didn't have the logistics data or the production statistics. But he knew with the certainty of a man who'd experienced both sides that the Americans weren't winning because they were better soldiers. They were winning because they had better everything. Better food, better clothing, better equipment, better supplies, better logistics. And all of that was represented in the 70-pound load that American soldiers carried and German soldiers could only dream of having. If this story revealed how 70 pounds beat 30 pounds, because logistics made abundance possible while scarcity made even light loads inadequate, how American soldiers marched 32 miles per day while German soldiers managed 15 miles despite lighter loads, how equipment quality mattered as much as equipment weight, then subscribe to War Rewind for daily revelations about World War II's decisive factors. Hit that like button if this changed how you understand infantry warfare. Comment what shocked you most. American march rates with heavy loads, German soldiers stealing American boots and blankets, or the fact that good socks prevented more casualties than many weapons. Tomorrow we reveal another asymmetry that decided the war. Until then, remember that the best equipped soldier isn't the lightest. It's the one who has everything he needs to fight, march, and survive. America equipped that soldier. Germany couldn't. That's why one side won.